In this example, we're going to use a vector file that we've created in the software, and using the vectors, we're going to look at modelling the teddy bear head using the Create Shape modelling tool. And then to finish off, we're going to look at how you'd set up the part for machining. So let's go to File, Close. So let's go and open an existing file. From the Teddy Bear Head project folder, we're going to open teddybearvectordrawing.crv3d, and then we could go ahead and press open there. So we can see here we have a set of simple vectors that were created in the software, where we used the draw circle and draw ellipse tool to create all the shapes you can see here. With the exception of this vector here, although it was created with the Draw Ellipse tool, we've actually edited the shape in order for us to create the shape of the mouth there. Now what we're going to do is we're going to select vectors one by one, and using the Create Shape tool, we're going to create components that make up the bear's head. So that we can easily select the vectors and see what is happening while we're creating the shapes, we're going to look at tiling our windows. I'm going to come over to the View toolbar. We're going to use this icon here, and this will tile our windows vertically. So when I click on that, we can see on the left hand side I can see the 2D view, and on the right hand side here I can see the 3D view, and the 3D view is where we'll be able to see our composite model. To build components, we need to come to the bottom of the interface where we switch over to the Modelling tab. So if you just click on the word Modelling, that'll switch us from the Drawing tab into the Modelling tab. Now in the Modelling tab, I now have access to all of my model creation and editing tools in the top half here, and then in the bottom half is what we call the component tree. So when I create components, they'll be added to the lower half of the Modelling tab here. Now the result of the visible components and the combine modes will be shown in the 3D view, and that's what we'd call the composite model. Now as we have no components in our component tree, we have no model visible here in the 3D view. Now before we go and create any components, I just want to take a moment to organise my component tree levels. Now by default we always start a job with level 1. Now levels are a way for me to organise my component tree, where I could change the name if I wanted to, along with the combine mode. So let's change the name of level 1. I'm going to right click, rename that level, and I'm just going to type in a new word. In this case I'm going to call this level base. As we're creating the model bottom up, we're going to create the base shape first. So we're going to call that level base. When we create a shape, it will be added to this base level here. I can also look at changing the combine mode of the level to change how it interacts with other levels. Now as this is our first level, we have nothing to combine with this level, so we'll just keep this set to add, and we'll talk more about combine modes later on in this tutorial. Now for this example, we're going to exclusively use the Modelling tool Create Shape, which can be accessed under the Modelling tools as the first icon where we can create shape from vector outlines. If I click on that, that will open up the Create Shape tool. And so the Create Shape tool allows us to select vectors and assign shape profiles to them. For example, let's go and select the bear's head. So we're going to select this vector here. Then what we're going to do is we're going to go into the form where we're going to assign a profile. In this case we're going to choose the curved profile. I have 3 to choose from. I could choose an angled profile or a flat profile. As we're working with an organic shape, we're going to go with the curved profile. Then what we can do is we could go ahead and control the shape that we're going to create using various options that we have in the form. For example, I could assign an angle. In this case, I'm just going to highlight the number that we already have there, and I'm just going to simply type in 30 so that I apply a 30-degree angle to this curved shape that we're going to apply to our circle vector. Moving down the form, we have the option to add in a base height. We're going to leave this at 0. Then we have the option to specify the final height of the part. In this case, we're going to give that a final height that has no limit here. We have the option to tilt a component. In this case, we're going to make sure that is unchecked, as we do not want to apply a tilt in this instance. Then we choose how we combine this component with any other components that we may have in our job, or how it combines with the actual modelling plane that we've got here, whereby we can choose to set that to add, we could subtract it, we could merge the highest points, or we could merge the lowest points. In this case, we're going to use the add option here. Then we can give our newly created component a name. In this case, I simply select the text there so it's highlighted, and I could type in a name that I feel is appropriate for the shape that I'm creating. In this case, we're going to call this one face. Then I'll go ahead, hit the apply button there. And so as we can see in the 2D view, we have a yellow representation of the shape, and in the 3D view we can actually see that shape there. And if I just click anywhere on the modelling plane and then move my mouse, you can see that I'm able to view this newly created shape from all sorts of angles. Okay, so the shape we created is based on the vector we had selected and the various settings that we used in this form. Okay, so once we're happy with that, we could simply close that down. And so we can see in the component tree here, we have a component added to our base level, and it's called face. It's the component we just created, and if I click on that, you'll see that we're highlighting it there in the component tree. I can see the grayscale representation of that component highlighted there in the 2D view, and I can see the actual component highlighted here in the 3D view. Okay, now I could move and edit this object in its own right. If I just click into the white space, that will just deselect that component. So now I'd like to look at creating the shapes that will form the teddy bear's face. So we're looking at all the details, the eyes, the nose, the snout and the mouth. So to do this, I'm going to insert a new level. So to insert a new level, we right click on the existing level that we have here. So here we only have one level at the moment, and that's the base level. Then we right click on that level, and then we go to the option to insert a new level, and that will create a new level. Here we could rename that level, right click, rename the level, and as that text is highlighted, we're going to give this a new name. We're going to call this one Details. And to set the combine mode of this level, so it's adding on top of the base level. So any shapes that I create now will be added on top of the face shape that we can see here in the 3D view. So let's start by selecting the snout vector. So with that vector selected, I'm going to come over to create shape. Okay, so that's opened up the create shape form. And here I need to assign a profile. Again, I'm going to go with that curved profile. I need to specify an angle. Now for the purpose of this video, I am going to be typing in exact values here, but you do have the option to use the slider to determine the angle, where you can review how the shapes look instantly here in the 3D view. For example, I could bring that right up, and you'll see that every time I let go of the slider, it updates the shape here in the 3D view. Okay, so as I said, I'm going to type in some values in here. So I'm going to go with 35 degrees in there. Base height 0, final height, set that to no limit. We're going to give this a name, and we're going to call this one Snout. going to set the combine mode of this to add, and then we could go ahead and press apply. We can see it's created that shape based on the settings we've got in the form here. Then we have the option to start a new component, so I can stay in the form by pressing start new component, in which case I can then just go over to the 2D view and select the next vector that I want to create a shape from. So let's select the nose vector here. Again, curved profile, angle, this time we're going to go with 60 degrees, so a little bit steeper this time. No limit for the final height. Set the combine mode of this to add, so it adds on top of the snout shape that we just created there. Then we could just highlight the name of the component, give that a name. I'm going to call this one nose. Press apply. We can see the result of that there in the 3D view. So you can start to see the actual teddy bear shape coming through there. Again, let's go ahead and start a new component. So now we're going to look at creating the eyes. Now I can select multiple vectors to create a shape from, where it would create one individual component. So with this vector selected, I'm going to hold down Shift to select the other eye, go into the create shape form. Again, we're going to use the curved profile. We're going to specify an angle of 40 degrees here. Final height set to no limit. We're going to add that on top of the base shape here, and then we're going to give that a name, and we're going to call this one eyes. Press apply, and you can see they've been added there in the 3D view. Okay, so let's just go and start a new component, and now we'll look at the mouth shape here. So we'll select this vector here, and then we're going to use the curved profile. We'll give that an angle of 50 degrees. Final height is set to no limit. Combine mode, we're going to set that to add on top of the snout shape, and then we're going to give that a name. We'll simply just call this one mouth, and then we could go ahead, press apply, where we can review that there in the 3D view. Now that looks okay, however I think we'll have a better looking shape if the combine mode of this mouth was set to subtract. So let's come over into the form and use this subtract option, and you'll see it will instantly update there, and you'll see we've got a much better result here. So that I'm happy with that, I could come over and close out of the create shape form, and you can see that those components have been added to the details level that we created earlier. And so the components that are sat within this level are adding on top of the base level. So that's why we can see here in the 3D view all of the details components are sat on top of the actual face shape, which is sat in the base level. Now what I'd like to do is look at creating the components that will represent the bear's ears. Now I want the ears to actually blend in to the face shape that we've got here. So let's go and insert a new level. So we're working with a new area of our design. I'm going to right click on the details level, insert new level, right click on level 1, rename that level. We're going to call this level ears, and then we're just going to click to accept that. And then what I'd like to do is just change the combine mode of this level. As I said, I'd like the ears to blend in to the face shape. So to change the combine mode of a level, we right click on the level, go to combine mode, and use the option here to select the various combine mode that you want to apply. In this case, I want this level to merge in with the levels below it, so we're going to use the merge option here. And with that level set up, we can now go into the create shape tool. So we're going to select the ear vectors. I'm going to select this one, hold down Shift to select this one here. Again, we're going to go with a curved profile here. We'll set the angle of this shape to be 40 degrees. Final height is set to no limit, and we're going to give this a name. We're going to call this one outer ear. Set the combine mode of this to add, and then we could go ahead and simply press apply. So you can see how these shapes are blending in to the face shapes, and that's all down to the combine mode of the level that we're currently using. We'll talk more about that in a moment. So let's go ahead and start a new component. This time we're going to look at the inner ears, so we're going to select this vector here, hold down shift and select this vector here. Again, we're going to go with a curved profile, 35 degrees this time, and then we're going to set the final height to have no limit. This time we're going to set the combine mode of this to subtract, so it's going to recess into the outer ear shape that we've just created. So we'll use the subtract option, give that a name, and we're going to call this one inner ear. And then we could go ahead and press apply, and we can see that there in the 3D view. So let's close out of the Create Shape tool. So let's just take a moment to review the component tree and see how it's ordered in order for us to see the composite model as we do right now. So we're just going to switch the visibility of all of the levels and the components off by clicking on this checkbox here. Okay. So when we start a job, we just start with our modeling plane in view. So this is our modeling plane where we build shapes onto. So we'll put that in Z. So the first level we created was the base level. So if I click on the base level, see we've got the base levels, combine mode is set to add. So it's just adding onto the modeling plane. We created a component in that level called the face, and that's this component here. Again, the combine mode of this is set to add. It's currently just adding on top of the modeling plane there. Then we moved on and we created all of the components that represent the detailed areas of the teddy bear's face. So we looked at creating a new level that was sitting on top of the base level. You can see that there because the combine mode of the details level is currently set to add. So anything that's created in this level adds on top of the base level and ultimately adds on top of the face shape that's sat within that base level there. So if we come over and just switch on the visibility of the details level, and I'm just going to uncheck the visibility of the three components here, and we'll just leave the snout switched on. So the snout is adding on top of the face shape. Combine mode is set to add. Then we added a nose on top of the snout shape. So you can see that's adding on top of the snout, and the snout is adding on top of the face. Then we added the eyes, that's adding on top of that face shape, and then we added in the mouth where the combine mode is set to subtract, and so that's just recessing into the snout shape, and we can see that there. Let's just put that in Z. Then we created the ears level where we set the combine mode of this level to merge so that the components that we create within this level that represent the ear shapes would ultimately blend in with the current composite model. So let's just switch that on so we can see there that those ears are blending in to the face shape of the bear. Now if we change that and was to look at this as if we had the combine mode set to add, we can see clearly here that this is not the look that we would be after, and that's why we set the combine mode of this level to merge so that these ears could actually blend in to the face shape. So let's just right click combine mode and we'll just set that back to merge. And so within that ears level we had the outer ear component, and then we created the inner ear that is subtracting into the outer ear, and overall they're sat within a level that's merging, and so it's actually blending in to the composite model there. And we can edit these individual components if we wanted to. We could select them from the component tree, we could select them in the 2D view, we can even select them in the 3D view. If I wanted to, I could select multiple components, so I could just select one, shift to select the next, shift to select any others that I wanted to add to my selection. Then what I could do is I could select them again to put them into transform mode, where I could just simply size them. I could look at rotating the components, I could move them over. And so we have lots of power over the individual shapes that we've created. And there are many editing tools that we have access to make further changes to the shapes that we've created if we wanted to. So let's just go to Edit, Undo Move, Undo Rotate, and Undo Size. So now that we have all of the components that form the teddy bear head, I need to create a single vector that's going to represent the area that we want to cut. And we can use this as a boundary vector, and that will contain the toolpath that we're going to calculate. So one way that I could do this is select all of the components. To do that, I could simply select the inner ear component, hold down Shift and then select the face component, and you'll see that all of the components in between have also been selected there. And with those selected, I could simply come over to the modelling tools and look at using the option to create a vector boundary around the selected components. What that will do is it will just simply create a vector based on the outline of all of the selected components there. Now we have a set of vectors here that, if welded together, would create a perfect outline in order for us to create our toolpath. And in order for us to do this, we're going to look at using layers. Now layers are a good way for us to manage 2D data. So let's just click into the white space to deselect those components. We're going to select this ear here, Shift to select the face, Shift to select the right ear. So you can see we now have 3 vectors in our selection there. Now if I use the right mouse button, that will open up a context sensitive menu, and you'll see towards the bottom we have this option to copy those vectors to a layer. Okay, in this case we're going to go and open up a new layer. Layer 1 is the only layer that we currently have available at the moment. It's the layer that we're currently working with. Well, we want to create a new layer, so we're going to use the new layer option. We could give this layer a name. I'm happy to go with layer 2 here. I'd like to make that visible. I'd also like to make that the active layer. Then we could go ahead and press OK. Now if we go into the Layers tab at the bottom here and just click on the word Layers, that will open up the Layers tab. So you can see we have layer 1, we have layer 2. Let's just turn the visibility of layer 1 off by selecting the light bulb here. Okay, so these 3 vectors are the vectors that we copied over to layer 2. And so it's worth noting here that what you see in the 2D view does not affect what you can see here in the 3D view. That is always derived by what you can see in the component tree. So if we went into the Modelling tab, what we can see in the 3D view is the composite model, and that's always defined by the components that we've got visible within our component tree, the order that they are in the list, and the combined modes of the levels and the components. So let's go into the Drawing tab, and we're going to take these 3 vectors and we're going to look at welding them, so we're just left with the outline of those vectors combined together. So if those 3 vectors selected, let's go over to Edit Objects, and we're going to use Weld Selected Vectors. When I click on that, it's just going to weld them, and it's just going to keep the outermost vectors there. And so you can see we now have a vector that represents the actual silhouette of our teddy bear head, and we're going to use this for our toolpath boundary. So now that we have our finished model, we have a vector that represents the boundary of our model, we're now ready to start calculating toolpaths in order for us to cut this out on our CNC machine. To access the Toolpath tab, we can come over to the Design tab over on the left hand side, and at the top here we can use this icon to switch to the Toolpath tab, where it will open up the toolpath, it will pin that tab out, and then over on the left hand side it's just temporarily hidden the design tabs, but we can still access those by simply hovering our mouse over them just to temporarily open up the various design tabs. Okay, so I'm just going to move my mouse over and you'll see it'll just close the design side of the software there. So now that the toolpath tab is open, we have access to various icons in order for us to create these toolpaths. Now the first and most important thing that we need to do before we create any toolpath, and that's to go over the material setup. And so this material setup is where we relate our virtual setup in the software to the actual physical setup of the parts that we're going to cut. So to access the material setup, come over to Set here, and that will open up the material setup form. So the first thing that we need to do is define the material thickness that we're actually physically using. Okay, so I am using 3/4 inch material there, so I'm going to leave that set to 0.75. Next, we need to specify our XY datum position. So this is where we tell the software where on the machine we want to set the X0, Y0. Now this doesn't matter in terms of the fact that it's really a personal choice where you set this, but a lot of people prefer to set this to the lower left, because that's typically the way most CNC machines are referenced from, in the lower left. That way the X and the Y values will always be positive, but you should always pick one that is suitable for your machine. Then we move on to the Z0. In this case we're going to set our Z0 off the top of the block, so we're going to use the option Material Surface in this case. Now the next option in the form is the model position in the material. Because we have a 3D object, we need to relate where the model is going to be positioned within the material block. Now before I go ahead and position this, what I would like to do is just check my model thickness. I can see in the form here it's displaying as 0.5986. I just want to look at rounding that up to 0.6. So to do that, we use the Set button here, and that will open the Set Model Height option. Here we could type in 0.6, and then I can press Apply to update that. We could close out of that form, and you'll see that 0.6 has been added here. Now this light colour here actually represents that model thickness, and what I can do is I can position that model anywhere I like within this block of material. Now in this case what I would like to do is apply a gap above the actual model itself. So I'm going to type in a very small amount here of 0.03. You can see the image is actually updated there. And so that 0.3 value is just a small value in there just to account for any inconsistencies that we may have with our material thickness, and so that then we avoid creating any flat spots. So then we'd check over the rapid Z gaps above the material, check the clearance and the plunge are safe and appropriate for what you're doing. Then check over your home and start position, so we've got that X0, Y0, and then the Z gap above the material. We're just going to change that, we're just going to make that 0.5, again ensuring it's all safe, and then we could go ahead and press OK. So now we're ready to run our first toolpath. So we've got our boundary vector selected, and this will govern the area that we want to create our toolpaths. So with that selected, let's go and create the 3D roughing toolpath. So we're going to go over to the 3D roughing toolpath, and this toolpath will allow us to use quite a large tool to just hog out the majority of the material. So the first thing that we do in the toolpath form is select a tool from our tool database. So you can see at the moment we are currently using a 1/4 inch end mill. That is the tool that I'd like to use, but let's have a look at the select option. So in select, that will open up the tool database. Under Imperial Tools, you'll see I have a list of various tools here. We have end mills, ball nose, V-bits and various other specialist tools. In here I can select a tool, I can just check over the settings that we've got in there for that tool, and if I'm happy with those I could go ahead and press OK to actually select that tool. So we're going to look at using a 1/4 inch end mill here. So the next area in the list is where we specify our machining limit boundary. We could choose the model, the material or the vector. Now in this case we are going to use the selected vector. We created a nice vector by welding the 3 vectors that we used to create the shapes of the bear, so we're going to go with the vector boundary. Then we have the option here to apply a boundary offset. Now as we are working with a positive shape, it's a good idea for me to input a boundary offset so that the centre of the tool doesn't just come up to the vector, it's going to come past it by the amount we offset it, so that it can cut down the sides of our model. Now a good offset to use is the radius of the tool plus the machining allowance. So I'm just going to input a value here of 0.18. Moving down the form, we have the option to apply a machining allowance. And this is a skin of material that the software will leave on the model to protect the finish so that the larger tool doesn't chip at the surface of the finished part. And so we're just going to go with a very small allowance here of 0.03. Then we move on and we choose our strategy, where we can choose a Z-level strategy or we could do a 3D raster strategy. In this case we're going to do this as a Z-level strategy, where we're going to raster in X. It's going to raster that parallel to the X-axis and we're going to apply a profile last here. We could add in ramp plunge moves if we wanted to, and then we could go ahead and give our toolpath a name. In this case we're going to call this one 3D roughing bear, and then we could simply go ahead and press calculate, and you'll see it's automatically opened up the preview toolpaths form. And all of the blue lines that you can see here in the 3D view represent the path that the tool is going to take to cut this out. We have the option to choose the appearance, and then we could go ahead and actually preview that toolpath. So I'm going to stick with the cherry wood there, as that's the material that I'm actually going to cut into. And I could go ahead and preview this toolpath. So we've got animate preview switched on, and then when we go ahead and preview this, the software is going to animate the roughing toolpath in a virtual piece of wood, and the preview that we see here is exactly what we're going to get on our CNC. And so you can see here it's just creating the preview there of how the part will actually be cut. And so we can see the different steps involved there, the different passes. Okay, so it's done that, and then we could just take a look at that in the 3D view. You can see those different steps that we have, and this is just basically hogging out the material so it's safe for us to go back to and create a finishing pass that will cut the finished part out using a smaller tool. So let's just put that in the ISO view, and we're just going to close down the preview toolpath form. So with our boundary vector still selected, we're going to take that and go into the 3D finishing toolpath. So I'll open up the finish machining toolpath here. Again, we need to choose a tool. I can see the tool I want to use is actually currently selected. We've got an 1/8 inch ball nose here. Now if I wanted to edit the settings for this tool, or just glance over those, I could use the edit option here, where I could check the settings and I could edit them for this tool, for this particular toolpath alone. Okay, I'm happy with what we've got there, so we could go ahead and press OK. Okay, then machining limit boundary, we're going to use that selected vector again. boundary offset. Okay, so in this case we're going to apply an offset that's a little bit larger than the radius of the 1/8 inch tool that we're using. So we're just going to put in a value of 0.08 in this case. Then we move on to the area machine strategy, where we could apply an offset strategy that would just go round, or we could use the raster option, which will just go back and forth. So we're going to use the raster option with a raster angle of 0 degrees, so it's parallel to the x-axis. Then we could give that a name, so we're going to call this one 3D Finish Bear, and then go ahead, press calculate. Okay, so again it's opened up that preview toolpath form, and we can see the toolpath here in the 3D view. So let's just go ahead and preview that toolpath so you can see how this is actually going to be cut out on our CNC machine. Okay, so you can see it takes a little bit longer because we are using a smaller tool, and there's a lot more detail to get in on that model there. Okay, so we can see how that looks. You can see we're getting sufficient detail there and a sufficient finish, so I'm happy with that. So then what we could do is move on to our next toolpath, which will enable us to actually cut the bear head out of our block of material that we have. So if we just put that in the ISO view, and we're just going to close out of the preview toolpath form, just go ahead and tile our windows, and with that vector selected we're going to go over to the toolpath operations and go into the first icon, the profile toolpath. So the first thing we need to do is specify our cutting depths. The start depth is going to be at 0 on top of our material block. Cut depth, we're going to cut all the way through, and we know that we're using 3/4 inch material, so we're going to type that value in there. The tool I'd like to use to cut this out is actually the 1/4 inch end mill, which I can see is the currently selected tool. Okay, so as that's selected, I can see that it's going to cut that in 6 passes. So I could look at just editing this tool for this particular toolpath alone. So use the edit option and it will open up the edit tool form. We can see the pass depth for this tool is currently at 1/8 inch. Now I feel that I could up this to 1/4 inch, and that will be safe for my own setup. So we'll up the pass depth to 1/4 inch and then go ahead and press OK, and I can see that we are now going to cut that in 3 passes. Then we choose how we machine the vectors, outside, inside, or actually on the vector. In this case we want to use the outside option. We could add tabs to our toolpath. Now I don't have a vacuum hold down system, so I'm going to check the option to add tabs to my toolpath so that my bear head stays in place safely to the material block. So we're going to add tabs to the toolpath. We can alter the length and thickness of the tabs if we wanted to. So in this case we're going to go with a length of 0.5 and a thickness of 0.1 in there. Then we could use the edit tabs option. We could input a constant number of tabs. So in this case I'd like to just put in a constant number of 3 tabs in here, and we could use the add tabs option and it will automatically input those tabs, and you can see those tabs represented in the 2D view by those yellow squares with the letter T inside. If I didn't like where a tab was positioned, I could simply click on it to delete it. I can click anywhere on the vector to insert a tab, or I could click on an existing tab and just move it around to where I wanted to. So I'll do the same over here. Okay, so got our tabs in place there, so we could just simply close that down, come down to the bottom of the form. We could give that a name. We'll call this one Profile Bear Cutout, and then we could simply go ahead and press calculate. And so it's opened the preview toolpath form where we could preview that toolpath, and if we just go ahead and maximize the 3D view, we can see those tabs in position there, where we'd look at manually removing those tabs once the machining process has finished. Now it's very important that your part looks correct at this stage, as the toolpath preview shows you a very accurate representation of what you'd see on your CNC machine if you was to go ahead and run these toolpaths. So if something doesn't look as you wanted it to here at this stage, you can go back, make edits to the toolpaths, recalculate them until you are satisfied with the results that you see here in the toolpath preview. And that's what makes the toolpath preview such a powerful tool. And so once you're happy with that preview, we can close out of the preview toolpaths form and we could go ahead and start saving out the toolpaths. So to save a toolpath, select the toolpath you'd like to save, go into Save Toolpath. We're just going to uncheck Output All Visible Toolpaths to one file. So you can see in this list here, toolpaths to be saved, we've got the 3D roughing. It gives us the tool that we're using there. And what you need to do is select a post processor from the list of post processors that we have. And the post processor will format the data for that particular machine. So you need to choose one that is suitable for your own machine. So here we've got lots of different post processors available. In this case, I'm just going to go with the G code and then simply press Save Toolpath. Give that appropriate name. If I wanted to include the tool that I'm using in the name, I could do that as well. And then I'd go ahead and press Save, and then we'll do the same for the other two toolpaths. And then what I can do is I can go and take those toolpaths and then take them over to my machine and actually cut the file out. So let's close that down. And so that really completes this tutorial. So let's go ahead and save the file. Go to File, Save As, and in the Project folder you can access this file, teddybeargettingstarted.crv3d. Press Save and you can access that from the Project folder.